So you brought some other artwork from your collection in today. I assume you have some interior pages as well, some things that aren't covers?
Yeah, so let's talk about the insides of the book and what you might find out there. The first thing I'm going to show you here is what we call a title splash. You'll see this is from G.I. Joe number 24, which was, as we talked about before, published with a June 1984 cover date. The artist for this one is Russ Heath. So in this case, the artist penciled and inked it himself.
Yeah.
So it's all in one. But what you'll notice it's a little bit different here is first this indicia is what we call this down at the bottom. So this is the publication information, and it was typically pasted on. But here they have to add all the legal details around all the characters and copyrights and all the rest of that stuff. You can always read that, as well as the publication date. And then you'll notice up here, which is the title. And so this story had a title, which was The Commander Escapes. This is about Cobra Commander escaping from the G.I. Joes. And up here, this is another photo stat that you have of G.I. Joe that they would typically put up there. And Stan Lee presents, although in this case, Stan Lee probably didn't have much to do with it, but because it was a Marvel comic, it was always a great way of introducing a lot of the Marvel comics at the time.
Of course, yeah. And so you touched on the fact that this was penciled and inked by the same person. Is any of the pencil work still visible in the artwork?
Yeah. A lot of times they would actually erase it. So if you do look closely, and I think this is the great thing about comic art, is when you look at it and you study it, you can notice things that either didn't get inked by the inker, or they may extend out into the borders. In this case, they did a pretty good job of erasing things. But what you do notice is that there are corrections that are sometimes doing it, and you'll notice that it's in blue pencil because blue pencil doesn't show up when they shoot the artwork in black and white. So if you put this on a photocopier, you're not going to see all these notes that are over here. So in this case, it looks like they changed the colorist at the last minute, which was now George Russo.
Yeah.
And so they wanted it, they had whited it out, and you can sort of see the faint white out there that they originally planned on having somebody else do that.
Right.
And it looks like they had spelled Larry Hama's name, who was the writer. I think it says Larry Hamar. So
Yeah.
I think they found that error and they corrected that as well. Larry was probably happy about that.
Yeah.
But this is the comic book itself, and then you can sort of see what it looks like when it was published there. Got the Moon Patrol over here from the classic 1980s as well.
And this is the standard size for a title page from this era?
Yep, that is the standard size. But there's other types of splashes, and so I'll actually contrast it with another G.I. Joe. So I'll just put that up there. This is a G.I. Joe that was published in the early 2000s. And this is also a splash page, which when I say a splash page, what it is, it's one big image. And I think that's what you notice in common. This is a title splash because it's the first, it doesn't always have to be the first page in the book, but it's establishing what the title of the book is. This is an interior splash where they're trying to accentuate some of the action that's going on there. You won't notice this. It was actually a silent issue, so this has no word balloons that are going on this, but I think you also do find artwork in some cases that has the word balloons that are actually drawn on the page, and in some cases they added it later. In today's world, they'll actually digitally add it as well. So in some cases, you won't find word balloons on a page, and it's just sort of, I'm going to say luck of the draw, but for each issue it was slightly different on how they actually produce these things.
Yeah. And so a splash is just inherently slightly more interesting because it's larger artwork. If you're a collector, you're going to frame it and put it on your wall. It's going to be a bit more presentable, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I think, and this is just to show what it looked like in print. I'd say for a lot of people will seek out the splashes because they are rarer.
Yeah.
Typically there were, let's say 20 pages, in this case I think there's 22 pages in the G.I. Joe story. There's only one splash. So similar to one cover, if you can't have the cover for the book, a lot of people will say, well great, then I'll look for the splash because that could be the next best thing. But you may not like the image that's on there. You might actually prefer another page in there, and so to you, the value of it, an interior panel page, and we'll show you some of those in just a bit, may be more valuable to you than the splash. But I would say in general, the splashes are a little bit more desired and a little bit more pricey because the artwork is, again, bigger the better. Yeah. And it presents well on the wall.
We looked at the wraparound cover. Do you ever have a dual-page interior splash?
Yes. I think those, I'm going to say they're common. They're actually even less common than a title splash are, but I think also very impressive. And I think Jim Steranko, if I remember, did a 4-page Shield one. So it actually had 4 pages that sort of connected. Now in the book itself, it's very difficult because you only have 2 pages here.
Right.
But you'd have a double-page spread here that continued into a double-page
interesting
spread there as well. But they do exist, and they're great to collect.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on then to standard interior pages.
Yeah, I'll show you sort of a hybrid. So we'll show you a panel page here, if you don't mind me stacking those up over there. I'll show you another character that has now become popular for Amazon is the Tick.
The Tick.
I've always loved the Tick.
Yeah.
And so this is an early page with Arthur and the Tick teaming up for the very first time.
Okay.
But you'll notice here there's a very large panel up here that's about 2/3 of the page, and then there's some others here. And this, you'll also notice this is the end page, and it introduces what the next issue is going to be called. But we call this a 2/3 splash in this case, and in some cases you'll call it, if there was half the page, it would be a half splash. So a lot of people like to describe the pages that have the larger images in them as splashes. But I've seen it go so far where people call it a quarter splash, where there's 4 panels and each of them is equal. That's
Right.
going a little too far. But in this case, I think it does add some weight to the page, and so worthy of calling it itself a 2/3 splash.
Yeah.
But here's an example of, I would say, probably a more typical panel page where it's laid out. Usually, sometimes you'll have two panels next to each other. Sometimes you'll have 3 panels. But a lot of them will have between, let's say, 5 and 8 panels per page telling the story. And in this case, this is a great issue here, which is the retelling of the origin of Captain America, and it really is all done in one page, where he wakes up from having been frozen for a number of years after, in the Atom Age, it was thrown off when his plane exploded into the freezing waters. And so here are the Avengers, and I think you see this replayed in the Captain America movie, where they find him and they defrost him, and he essentially comes back to life here in this.
What's the year on this piece?
This was 1968,
Right, okay.
and so in 1968 they relaunched a lot of the character titles, including the Hulk, Captain America, Submariner. But they had previously had them. Captain America was actually in a book with Iron Man, and so they shared it, called Tales of Suspense. In this case, they decided, let's give Captain America his own book. We'll relaunch it. And so this was the first issue in which Captain America really had his own book for the first time
Fantastic.
since the 1940s.
Yeah. And so I assume, based on everything that you've said about the splash pages and the covers, that these interior pages, the standard panel pages, are the majority of what exists in the market as far as original comic art, right?
Yes, I would say. And if you can look through a standard comic book here. The majority of the storytelling will occur in panel pages. Here happens to be an interior splash in this book, but a lot of it is panel pages.
Yeah.
So I'd say majority you will find will be that way.
Yeah.
But again, value, a page where they're retelling the origin is probably going to be more valuable than most of the other pages in this book, because that really sort of is the page you want to put on
Right,
the
the
wall.
content is that much more interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, part of what you have to take into account is the content, and and I would say this is much more valuable than, even though this is a splash page,
Yeah.
to me and many others, just because of what it is versus what it looks like.
Now, I noticed this does not have as much information on the borders as some of the covers that we looked like. Is there information contained here about who the pencil artist and the inker were?
Usually you'll find that in the publication itself. In this case,
Oh, I
this was the sort of the godfather of Marvel Comics, which is Jack Kirby. So this is a classic Kirby with Sid Shores inking. They worked for a short period of time on Captain America, but you're not going to necessarily find that in
The art.
on the page itself. But you will notice again in the margins there are notes, and that could either be by Kirby or Stan Lee, who I believe was the writer on this. So this was a Stan Lee and Jack Kirby production, and so it usually gives them a template for this. And
Yeah.
so I think your previous question around, can you see some of the pencil work? Well, here definitely you see the word balloons sort of showing through on some of this that haven't been erased or were done in blue pencil. So
And
you
it's
see a lot
jumping out
more
at me
of
that the pencil is blue. Is the pencil always done in blue in comic art?
It's not. No, usually the penciler, and I believe Kirby's pencils would have been done in graphite, so they would have been your gray, your standard gray. But then there would have been somebody else that would have come in after he had done the penciling to put the word balloons down so that they could make sure that in case Jack had to change the composition of the page because there was too many words on there.
Yeah.
They would take Stanley's script and then they would translate it to the word balloons, and then usually the inker would come in after that and ink the page. But it's a different skill set to be able to do all this lettering in such a precise way than it is to even ink a page. So they would have specialists that would come in and do that. And in this case, it was Artie Simek that was the letterer on this.
I see. And so something like Stan Lee annotated notes on the borders of the art, is that enhancing the appeal and the value of it?
I mean, I think it's
Because
very
it's
cool. I
Stan
think
Lee?
that's part of why you collect comic art, is to really understand the backstory of this. And sometimes you'll see notes like here is his mask, his shield. It's like just the power of those words in some ways of saying, hey, this is Captain America. This is there's no doubt in our mind that this is Captain America. We can see all that.
Yeah.
That's really cool to see, and it's done in a very short thing, and then they scripted that out a little bit more. I don't know if again, a piece of art is what it is, but I think when you think about the coolness factor of it, I'd say it's very cool to have them and rather than not to have
A
them.
nice bonus.
Yeah. But when you frame it up, some people may decide they don't want to show the notes, and some people do want to show the notes. It's all personal preference around how you present it.
Yeah. So this is a great example of a fairly standard piece as far as the format of comic art, which is the interior panel page.